Hello, this is Dr. Everybody. I'm going to make a couple of comments about Project 3. Now, what is Project 3 about? Well, in Project 3, we take some numbers in and then we check to see if they're increasing. We take a number in, we figure out how many pieces to split it into, like two-digit pieces, so we get three two-digit pieces out of that, the 15, the 41, the 52, and then we decide, and we ask the question, is it increasing order? If we take the same number and split it into three-digit pieces, we end up with those two, and guess what? Those are not in increasing order. So that's all we're trying to do, except that this actually is surprisingly tricky to do. Now, with any problem, there's always a simpler problem to look at. So one way we can look at this project is to say there's really three parts. We split it into we split the number into pieces. We ask whether it's increasing or not, and on top of that we have some error checking. All right, that's really that's really what it breaks down to. So let's not try to do all at once. Always leave error checking to the end. In this case, don't even think about increasing. Let's start out with how do we split the numbers. Okay? That's what our focus will be. And that's what I'd like to help you with right now. So one way to think of this, and we give you a hint in the project. As we say, it may be easier to process that whole number as a string when you split it. Okay, and by that I mean, let's look at, so what I'm talking about here is we input, kind of a long whole number, all right, and whether they input a whole number or not, we don't care about that right now. Start off, no error checking, just they're putting in a perfect, they give us a whole number. And then we give a split value, how many pieces do I split it into? And we're splitting into two, so I get a 12, a 34, and a 56. And then we decide whether it's increasing, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Also, it's surprisingly tricky to get commas between these numbers, so we don't worry about that right now. Our focus right now is going to be on taking that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and coming up with a 12, a 34, and a 56. That's what we want to start with. We don't even want to think about the rest of that. Now, so with that large number, we say think about it as a keep it as a string. So when I ask for input, and I say input a whole number being non-zero integer, then I won't do any error checking right now. I won't check this whole number. I'll just assume that we put in a whole number. And then we also have to put in a split. I'll combine putting that. For right now, I'm not going to put all the fancy words. We're just going to input a split and convert it to an int. Notice that the big number, the whole number I'm putting in, I'm going to keep as a string, and my split I'm going to want as an integer. And so the very first thing, and the first thing that I want to do here is go through that number as a string. So for ch in my end string, print. Let's just print ch. I have to save this. I'll save it someplace. Yep, I always, oops. I always have dummy.py someplace. Let's run this guy. And what does it do? It says input a whole number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's split. I'm not even using that number yet. And all I do is I go through and I print my values, my each digit, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so now I know I can at least input a couple of numbers, and I can do something with them. And of course now the challenge is, all right, how do I, so if my split is 2, so I want to have substrings that are too long, so I'd want to have the 12, the 34, and the 56. How do I go about doing that? Well, if we look at one approach, we give 2 possible approaches. And the one I'll look at is the first one. There is a second one which uses slicing, which is just a matter of getting the indices. In many respects, if you can figure it out, the slicing one is actually easier once you figure it out, or maybe not easier, but it only requires a couple of lines of code to do it. So if that one makes sense to you, go for it. I like it. It's a pretty nice approach. But I'm going to talk today about this first one. And so how do I attack this? Well, there's a couple of things going on here. So the first thing I do is I say start with an empty string to hold the substring. That is the split. So let's call it my number string. And I start with it being empty. 2 quotes with nothing in between. Now I'll loop through the whole number 1 digit at a time. And now I'm going to loop through the number 1 digit at a time. That's doing this. All right. So each character or digit, it might make more sense for digit in num string. That might be a little easier. So we go through one whole number. We go through the whole number 1 digit at a time, and that's what we're doing here. And now we append digits to my substring. So rather than printing each one, and I could leave the print in there, and what I'm saying is append my digits, that's the CH in this point, to my substring, which I call numstring. And we use concatenation, which is the plus operator. So I append them on there. Then I will check if the substring reaches some desired length. We know about if. How do I check length? Well, that's the length function. What am I looking at the length of? My num string. And if it's some desired length, well, I know how long I want it to be. So do you need less than? Do you need less than or equal to? You have to figure that out. And so if it reaches the desired length, maybe it's when it gets greater than some value. Do something with the substring. Well, in this case, starting out, I would simply print it. Print my substring, which is my num string. All right, and then reset the substring to be empty. So I'll print it, and now I go back and I say, let's go back to the beginning. And let's make it empty. We're starting a new string, and then reset the substring count to 0. Aha! So we needed a count in here. So let's go back and rethink this part. We're going to not look at the length of this, but we want to keep track of a count. So is my count less less than whatever length I've chosen. Like this time, I guess suppose I entered a 2 in here. So if my count is less than 3, well, that means I need to have a count. I better start at 0. And I append a character on there. Aha! That means every time I put a character on there, then I have to adjust my count someplace. Add 1 to it. So I need to have that in here someplace. So now think about that. We append the digits to the substring. If the substring reaches the desired length, do something with that substring, and when do we want to do that? There's actually a couple of different ways you could think about this. One way you could do it actually is to say, if the substring reaches the desired length, we do something. That is, we print it and we reset things. Suppose that it didn't reach that length. Well, one way we could do that is put the append in down here. I guess I had it down here. Append my character to my num string using the using plus. All right. So if the substring has reached the desired length, we print it and reset. Otherwise, that means we need to append to it and increase my count. So what I've tried to do here is sort of flush out how you might do that. So we're not worrying about error checking. We're not worrying about commas. We're not worrying about any of that. So let's take a look at how this might go as a piece of code. So here we go. Fire this guy up that I have, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just because that's an easy one. My split is 2, and notice I'm not trying to print these in the same line, but I did get them down to being a 12, a 34, and a 56. All right. And we can come back to, all right, how do I print it on a line? Oh, I can have n equals, I can put in there as part of my print, toward the end in there, I can say end equals, say, a space, right? And that's one way I can do that. And then, later on I can worry about how to put the commas in there. So that's the very first thing you want to do, and that's a pretty tricky little exercise just to get to this point. All right, but it's easier than the whole thing, and that's where you should start. And once you have that working, then we can look at this question of what does it mean to be increasing. All right, so that means I go from 12 and then 34. Okay, 34 was bigger than 12. That's good. And then I look at the 56, and 56 is bigger than 34. So it was increasing. Well, if I want to know if it's increasing, I only have to look at pairs. So if I have 12 and 34 and 56 and 78, and I now want to check, I can check pairs. So I can say, is 12 less than 34? Yep. Is 34 less than 56? Yep. Is 56 less than 78? Yep. If the answer was yes to all of those, then we can say that the thing is increasing. Right. Now, let's back up a little bit. Let's take something that's not increasing. 12, 5, 14, and then, I don't know, 30. Right? And we go through looking at these again. I look at the 12 and the 25. That's increasing. 25, 14. That's not increasing. So as soon as I find any one pair that's not increasing, I can say for the whole thing, not everything is not increasing. Some parts are, but there's at least one piece that isn't, and that's all we need. Right? So notice it's just pairwise comparisons. So when I have a particular substring, all I have to do is compare it to the previous one. Now the tricky part here is, how do I get started? 12, 34, 56, 78. If I'm going through and doing comparisons, well, the trick is to pick some sort of a number, to some sort of an initial value. I don't know, let's pick -1. Right? That's not part of my original sequence. And so now whenever I look at a number, let's call this guy the old number. This is the old num string. And I'll have it equal to some small number. Actually 0 works fine. All right. It could be a -1, but some number that's smaller than everything in my sequence. Actually, it better be a negative. In fact, I think the way I did this as an int. I saved it as an int. That way I could start out with it being a -1. Now we go through and we what do? I take whatever num string I'm looking at. That would be num string. Make it an int. And say, all right, how does that compare to my old number? And I'll start out with my old number being -1, so I'll take my 12, compare it to -1, and yes, it's increasing. Now what do I do for the next thing? Well, I'll make my old number int, and that is going to be the same as my current number. Right, taking my num string and converting it to an int, so that every time, so what happens is when I go to generate the next number, my old num string now will be 12. So then when I create the num string that's 34, I compare it to the old num string, which was 12, and then I can see that that's increasing. And if that fails, then I know the whole thing is increasing. So that's a Boolean. So I can in fact keep track of this. I'll call it increasing. Let's assume that it's true. If I ever find that it's false, I make it false. So there's a couple of ideas on how to do the increasing or not. And then finally there's the error checking. I'll leave that to you, but in general we've had examples of that. You'll use while loops for that because we don't know how many times somebody's going to enter something stupid. So we ask for some input, and while it's bad, ask again. Whatever bad means. Is it a whole number? Okay, it's not greater than 0, etc. All right, there's a few hints. Good luck with it. Remember, these get a little harder each time.